NextJS just held the NextJS conference where they announced NextJS 14 and a load of other cool features and talks. Don't worry if you've just caught on to the app router and server components in general. Nothing major is going to break in this update, but they've added some really cool features that can be used alongside these things, and some of them may even replace some of the API routes you've been currently building. The first one we're going to look at is what's called server actions, which, as I just said, may replace some of the API routes that you've already implemented. The best way to explain this is if we take an example. So if we look at this example here of just a basic form with an input and a submit handler, what you'll see is on that onSubmit handler, it's going to make a post request to our API route. And then in that API route, we would then call a server-side function, which would say add something to the database for us. Now with server actions, we can do all of this within one file and it's handled for us. You no longer need that API route. All we need is this use server declaration here. Now everything within the create function will be run on the server, so we can co-locate our data mutations here. This has been a topic of debate among some of the web developers ever since this was announced and shown, and I think there was a bit of people not really understanding it. But I think as time goes on, we'll see some really good examples of this and some good adoption of this. It's worth noting as well, this isn't just for forms. You can actually call these functions directly without a form. It's helpful if you do use a form, and also they'll provide end-to-end type safety if you're using TypeScript. They're going to be a great addition to the app router model. You'll be able to call all of your cookies, caching, redirecting, and revalidation functions within them too. And they even have a couple of helper hooks like use form status and use form state, which will show you the error states and loading states all on the client for you. So the next big thing they announced was what they're calling partial pre-rendering. Now, this is currently in preview, so expect even more updates in the future. And they made sure to announce that this requires no new APIs to learn, which is great for those of us just catching up with the app router. Partial pre-rendering relies on your suspense boundaries. So if you take a page like this, where when partial pre-rendering is enabled, essentially what it's going to do is it's going to go into those fallback routes and render them for you. So when you request the HTML page, this static HTML is immediately served to the client. So it would look something a bit like this. Then if you have a component that needs to read for cookies, for example, that component is then streamed in as part of that same network request as the static site, so we don't need another round trip to the server. Partial pre-rendering, however, is under active development, and they'll share a lot more when they release a new minor release. The next announcement is a bit more minor than those other two, but an important one for meta and that page loading, and is sort of related to the one we just spoke about. Currently in NextJS, if you have metadata that looks like this, you'll use the metadata or the generate metadata function. They've now moved the viewport out into its own object called viewport and generate viewport. This has been done as the viewport metadata was considered blocking metadata, and in line with that partial pre-rendering that we just discussed, they needed to ensure that non-blocking metadata wouldn't stop that static HTML shell being served. Now, another really cool thing that was announced at the NextJS conference was that Vercels have released a new open source font. So here you'll see this new open source font that Vercels have released, and they have a sans and mono variant, and you can get started using this in your code straight away today. It's just really cool for them to do that. It's similar to how there's a cow sans font from cow.com, and it's just really cool, and I think you'll see a lot of sites using it, all with a sort of similar look as we've seen in the past. Another really cool announcement was you can now utilize these next third parties. So this is an experimental library at the moment, but essentially what they've done is they've created a helper library of components and utilities to implement the best practices and sort of loading things for you. At the moment, this works with Google Tags, Maps, and YouTube. I know I'll certainly be using that YouTube one as that's going to be really handy. And they're currently working on adding more third-party integrations. So this is really cool to see because it just really improves the developer experience of loading these things in. You don't have to go and look up a to-do or anything. And you know all of the best practices have been handled for you by a developer who's dug deep into it. Now, next up, they spoke a bit about Turbopack as well, which is their Rust-based compiler. This is what they hope to replace NextDev with as soon as it can pass all of their tests. You've been able to use this for a while using NextDev --Turbopack. They stated in their test, they've seen 50% faster loading dev server times and also 94% faster code updates with fast refresh. They even have a site, which is really cool, called Are We Turbo Yet?, which you see here. And this just shows you the amount of tests they have currently passing using this new Turbopack. It's also worth noting really quickly that they've even released a new free NextJS course on their NextJS Learn. It's a brand new course and it will teach you all of the new up-to-date best practices, and I'll leave a link for that in the description below. Finally, on the topic of Next.js 14, we may as well discuss some breaking changes. So they've updated the minimum Node.js version to 18.17. They've removed WASM target from next-swc if you were using that. They've dropped support for @next/font in favor of next font. So you may have seen this when you switched over from the pages router to the app router, that the import was a bit different. It went from @next/font to next/font. So they've now dropped support for next font. And they've also changed the import for image response, which I know I need to go and update, from next/server to next/og. And the last thing is they've got rid of the command next export. It's now deprecated in favor of using an option within that configuration. So guys, that's everything that I found really cool at Next.js conference, and just a bit of a recap on Next.js 14 and stuff that we should be excited to see coming out. Let me know what your favorite thing is, and if you have any more questions, I'll leave a couple links in the description below where you can find out all of this information and some of the talks. And again, if you have any more questions, you can leave them in the comments. Let me know what you're most excited for, and please like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.